The rain hammered against my apartment window like angry bullets, each drop exploding into 1,000 smaller pieces before sliding down the glass. I sat hunched over my laptop, the blue glow from the screen painting my face in an eerie light as I typed away at another meaningless report for my dead-end job at the insurance company. The coffee beside me had gone cold hours ago, forming a disgusting film on top that reminded me of motor oil. It was past midnight when the knocking started. 3 soft taps, then silence. Then 3 more taps, perfectly spaced, almost musical in their rhythm. I paused my typing and listened, wondering if I had imagined it. Living alone in a cramped apartment complex in downtown Seattle meant you heard all sorts of strange noises at all hours. Drunk college students stumbling home, cats fighting in the alleyways, the occasional domestic dispute from the unit above mine. But this was different. Deliberate. Careful. The knocking came again, and this time I was sure it was coming from my door. I glanced at the clock on my computer screen. 12:47 a.m. Who the hell would be visiting me at this hour? I didn't have friends who would drop by unannounced, especially not in the middle of the night. My family lived 3 states away, and my ex-girlfriend Sarah had made it crystal clear 6 months ago that she never wanted to see me again. I pushed back from my desk, my chair wheels squeaking against the hardwood floor. The apartment felt smaller in the darkness, the shadows seeming to press in from all sides. I had always been paranoid about late-night visitors ever since someone had broken into Mrs. Chen's apartment 2 floors down last year. The police said it was probably drug addicts looking for anything they could sell, but it had left everyone in the building on edge. Moving quietly to the door, I pressed my eye against the peephole. The hallway was dimly lit by a single flickering fluorescent bulb that the landlord kept promising to fix but never did. At first, I couldn't see anyone. Just the empty corridor with its faded green carpet and peeling wallpaper that had probably been there since the 1980s. Then, I saw movement. Someone was standing just to the left of my door, positioned perfectly to avoid being seen through the peephole. Smart. That made my heart rate spike even more. Burglars weren't usually that clever about security cameras and door viewers. This felt planned, professional. Who is it? I called through the door, trying to keep my voice steady. My name is Kath, came the reply. The voice was strange, with an accent I couldn't place. It sounded almost like English was a second language, but not in any way I recognized. The syllables were too precise, too carefully pronounced. I live in the unit beside yours. I apologize for the late hour, but I require assistance with an urgent matter. I frowned. The unit next to mine had been empty for months. I would have noticed someone moving in. The walls in this building were paper thin, and I could hear everything from my neighbors snoring to their television shows. There was no way someone had been living next door without me knowing about it. I think you have the wrong apartment, I said. Nobody lives next door to me. There was a pause. Then, the voice came again, more insistent this time. Please, Mr. David Chen. I understand your caution, but time is of critical importance. I have been observing your behavioral patterns for several weeks, and I believe you possess the specific qualities necessary for what I require. My blood turned to ice. He knew my name. He had been watching me. And the way he spoke about observing my behavioral patterns made it sound clinical, scientific. Like I was some kind of lab rat he had been studying. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. Should I call the police? Grab a knife from the kitchen? The baseball bat I kept beside my bed? Every instinct screamed at me to get as far away from this door as possible. But, then, curiosity got the better of me. It always did. Sarah used to say it was my biggest weakness and my greatest strength, depending on the situation. I had to know who this person was and what they wanted. The way he spoke was too strange, too formal to be a typical stalker or criminal. How do you know my name? I asked. I have access to the building's resident database, Kath replied. Among other sources of information. Mr. Chen, I understand this situation appears highly irregular, but I am not here to cause you harm. Quite the opposite. I am here because I need your help, and, in return, I can offer you something that will change your life in ways you cannot currently imagine." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Something that would change my life? I looked around my pathetic apartment with its second-hand furniture and water-stained ceiling. My life wasn't exactly something worth protecting. I worked 60 hours a week at a job I hated, lived paycheck to paycheck, and spent most of my free time alone watching Netflix or playing video games. What did I really have to lose? Still, I wasn't stupid enough to just open the door for a stranger in the middle of the night. "What kind of help?" I asked. "I require assistance with what you would call a technical problem," Kath said. "Your employment records indicate that you have extensive experience with computer systems and electronic engineering. Additionally, your psychological profile suggests you are resourceful under pressure and capable of maintaining discretion when necessary." My psychological profile? Who was this guy? Some kind of government agent? Corporate spy? The way he talked made it sound like he had access to information that should have been private, secure. "Look, I don't know who you are or what you want," I said, "but you're starting to freak me out. I think you should leave before I call security." The building didn't actually have security, but he didn't need to know that. "Mr. Chen, what if I told you that I am not from your planet?" The question came out so matter-of-factly that it took my brain several seconds to process what he had actually said. Not from my planet. As in, an alien. From outer space. I almost laughed. Almost. But something about his tone stopped me. He said it the same way someone might mention they were from Canada or Texas. Like it was just another piece of biographical information. "I'd say you're either crazy or this is some kind of elaborate prank," I replied. "I understand your skepticism," Kath said. "It is a rational response. However, I believe I can provide sufficient evidence to convince you. But only if you allow me to enter your residence." "Yeah, that's not happening," I said quickly. "If you're really an alien, prove it from out there." Another pause. Then, I heard a strange humming sound, like the noise my old computer made when it was processing something complex. The sound seemed to be coming from multiple directions at once, vibrating through the walls and floor. The lights in my apartment began to flicker. Not the normal electrical flicker of bad wiring, but in a pattern. Short flashes, long flashes, almost like Morse code. But faster and more complex than any Morse code I had ever seen. The pattern was hypnotic, almost musical. Then, my laptop screen changed. The insurance report I had been working on disappeared, replaced by what looked like a star chart. Constellations I didn't recognize connected by glowing lines that pulsed in rhythm with the humming sound. At the center of the display, a message appeared in text that seemed to write itself: solar coordinates, 127.3.41.9. Species designation, human. Planet classification, Class M inhabited. Current status, pre-contact civilization. Recommendation, limited intervention protocols authorized. The humming stopped. The lights returned to normal. My laptop screen flickered once more and went back to my boring insurance report as if nothing had happened. "Was that sufficient evidence?" Kath asked. I stared at the screen, my mouth hanging open. There was no way that had been a prank. The technology required to hack into my computer remotely and generate those graphics would have been incredibly sophisticated. And the star chart had looked so real, so detailed. Like it was actual navigation data from some kind of spacecraft. "Holy shit," I whispered. "I will take that as a yes," Kath said, and I could hear what might have been amusement in his voice. "Now, Mr. Chen, will you allow me to enter? I promise you are in no danger. My species has strict protocols regarding contact with pre-space civilizations." Pre-space civilizations. The term made humanity sound so primitive, so backward. But, if he really was an alien, I suppose that's exactly what we were compared to, beings who could travel between stars. I reached for the door lock, then hesitated. This was insane. I was about to let a complete stranger into my apartment in the middle of the night based on a light show and some computer graphics. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to call the police. But the rational part of my brain wasn't in control anymore. The curious part had taken over, the part that had always gotten me into trouble as a kid. The part that made me take apart radios and computers to see how they worked, even when I couldn't put them back together again. I unlocked the door. Keth stepped inside, and my first thought was that he looked remarkably human. Tall, maybe 6.5 feet, with pale skin that seemed to have a faint bluish tint in the dim light from my laptop. His hair was silver white and cut short, almost military in style. He wore what looked like a simple black jumpsuit that seemed to be made of some kind of material that shifted and shimmered when he moved. But his eyes gave him away immediately. They were larger than human eyes, a deep violet color that seemed to glow with their own internal light. And when he looked at me, I felt like he could see right through me, cataloging every detail and filing it away for later analysis. "Thank you," he said, glancing around my apartment with obvious interest. "Your dwelling is modest." "Thanks, I guess," I replied, still trying to process what was happening. "So you're really an alien?" "I am Keth of the 3rd Exploratory Division, Galactic Federation Research Vessel Astrid Stream," he said formally. "I represent a coalition of civilizations dedicated to the peaceful exploration and documentation of inhabited worlds throughout this galactic sector." The Galactic Federation. It sounded like something out of Star Trek, but the way he said it made it clear this was real. Actually real. "And you've been living next door to me?" I asked. "Not precisely," Keth said. "I have been using the adjacent unit as a temporary observation post." The building's management systems were easily circumvented, and the location provided optimal surveillance opportunities for studying human behavior patterns. "You've been spying on me." "Studying," Keth corrected. "My mission requires detailed understanding of individual human psychology and social dynamics. You have been observed because your profile matches specific criteria relevant to my current situation." I sank down onto my couch, suddenly, feeling overwhelmed. "What situation?" Keth moved to the window and looked out at the rain-soaked street below. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. 3 days ago, my research vessel suffered a catastrophic systems failure during a routine scanning operation in your outer solar system. The ship is currently in a decaying orbit around what you call Saturn, and life support systems are failing. My crew of 47 individuals will be dead within 72 hours unless I can complete an emergency repair. "Why don't you just call for backup?" I asked. "Signal other ships in your fleet?" "Our communication systems were damaged in the same incident that crippled the ship," Keth explained. "Additionally, the nearest Federation vessels are approximately 6 months away at maximum velocity. By the time they arrived, my crew would be long dead." I felt a chill run down my spine. "So what does this have to do with me?" Keth turned from the window to look at me directly. Those violet eyes seemed to bore into my soul. "The component necessary for repair can only be fabricated using materials and techniques available on your planet," he said. "However, the process requires someone with intimate knowledge of human technology and manufacturing processes. Someone who can think creatively and adapt quickly to unfamiliar situations. Someone who can work under extreme pressure." The pieces clicked together in my mind. "You need me to help you fix your spaceship." "Correct," Keth said. "Your educational background in electrical engineering, combined with your employment experience in complex systems analysis, makes you uniquely qualified for this task. Additionally, your psychological profile indicates high adaptability and low likelihood of psychological breakdown under stress." "My psychological profile that you compiled by spying on me," I said. "By observing your daily routines and behavioral responses," he corrected again. "I required assurance that you possessed the mental fortitude necessary for what I am about to ask." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "This is crazy. I'm nobody special. I work in insurance claims processing. I spend my weekends playing video games and eating takeout Chinese food. I'm about as far from a space hero as you can get." Keth studied me for a long moment. "Mr. Chen, may I ask you a personal question?" "Go ahead." "You've already violated my privacy in every other way." Are you satisfied with your current existence? The question hit me like a physical blow. Satisfied? I looked around my cramped apartment, thought about my soul-crushing job, my non-existent social life, my complete lack of anything resembling a future worth looking forward to. When was the last time I had felt truly excited about anything? When had I last felt like my life had meaning or purpose? No, I admitted quietly. I'm not satisfied at all. Then, perhaps this represents an opportunity, Kath said. To do something that matters. To save lives. To be part of something larger than yourself. And, if I say no? Kath's expression remained neutral, but I caught a flicker of something in those alien eyes. Fear? Desperation? Then, I will continue searching for another candidate, he said. Though given the time constraints, the likelihood of success decreases significantly with each hour that passes. 47 lives hanging in the balance. An alien crew slowly dying in the cold vacuum of space while their ship fell towards Saturn's crushing gravity well. And, somehow, impossibly, I was the key to saving them. What exactly would I have to do? I asked. Travel with me to a fabrication facility capable of producing the necessary component, Kath said. The nearest suitable location is approximately 400 miles from here. We would need to arrive, complete the fabrication process, and return to my ship within 60 hours. How? It's not like I can just call in sick and disappear for 3 days. And how would we even get there? Do you have some kind of invisible spaceship? Kath reached into his jumpsuit and pulled out what looked like a smartphone, except it was perfectly black and seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He touched the surface in a complex pattern, and it lit up with the same violet glow as his eyes. Transportation and logistical concerns have been addressed, he said. As for your employment obligations, that is easily resolved. My phone rang. I looked at the caller ID and felt my heart skip a beat. It was my boss, Monica. At 1 a.m. Answer it, Kath said. With trembling fingers, I picked up the phone. Hello? David, hi, I'm so sorry to call so late. Monica's voice sounded tired and stressed. I know this is incredibly short notice, but I just got a call from corporate. They need someone to fly out to our Denver office tomorrow to handle an emergency audit situation. Apparently their entire IT system crashed and they need someone with your technical background to help sort everything out. I stared at Kath, who was watching me with those unnerving violet eyes. Denver? I managed to say. I know it's a lot to ask, Monica continued, but you'd be doing me a huge favor. It's a 3-day assignment, all expenses paid, plus overtime and a bonus for the short notice. What do you say? Yes, I heard myself saying. Yes, I can do that. You're a lifesaver, David. I'll email you all the details. Your flight leaves at 8 a.m., so you should probably start packing. Thanks again. The line went dead. I looked at the phone in my hand, then at Kath. You arranged this, I said. Your civilization's computer networks are not particularly sophisticated, Kath replied. Manipulation of employment records and communication systems presented minimal technical challenges. You hacked my company's entire system just to give me a cover story? The fabrication facility we require is located near what you call Denver, Kath explained. The geographical proximity is not coincidental. I sat back down heavily, trying to process everything that was happening. In the span of 20 minutes, my entire worldview had been shattered and rebuilt. Aliens were real. One of them needed my help. And, somehow, impossibly, I was about to become part of a rescue mission to save a dying starship crew. This is insane, I muttered. Yes, Kath agreed. However, it is also necessary. Mr. Chen, I will not lie to you. What I am asking is dangerous. The fabrication process involves working with materials and technologies that could be lethal if mishandled. Additionally, there are complications regarding the current status of the facility we need to access. What kind of complications? Kath hesitated for the first time since entering my apartment. The facility is not currently under human control. A chill ran down my spine. What does that mean? It means that other elements of the galactic community are aware of my situation, Keth said carefully. And not all of them share the Federation's commitment to peaceful coexistence with pre-contact civilizations. Are you saying there are hostile aliens involved in this? I am saying that the situation is complex, Keth replied. And that your assistance may be required for more than simple technical fabrication. Great. Not only was I being asked to help fix an alien spaceship, but apparently there might be some kind of interstellar conflict involved as well. Because of course there would be. Why should I trust you? I asked. How do I know you're telling me the truth about any of this? Maybe you're the hostile alien and this is all some kind of elaborate trap. Keth reached into his jumpsuit again and pulled out what looked like a small crystal, about the size of a golf ball. It was completely transparent except for a small blue light that pulsed gently in the center. This is a memory crystal, he said, holding it out to me. It contains my personal logs from the past 2 weeks, including detailed records of my observations regarding your planet and species. If you are willing to interface with it, you will have access to my complete thoughts and experiences during this time period. Interface with it how? Physical contact while the crystal is active will create a temporary neural link, Keth explained. You will experience my memories as if they were your own. You will understand my motivations, my fears, my desperation to save my crew. But, more importantly, you will know without doubt that I am telling you the truth. I stared at the crystal. The idea of letting an alien device mess with my brain was terrifying. But, it was also the only way I could be sure about what I was getting myself into. Will it hurt? I asked. No, Keth said. Though the experience may be disorienting. You will see things your mind is not equipped to fully comprehend. But, you will survive it unchanged. I reached out and took the crystal from his hand. The moment my fingers made contact, the world exploded into light and sensation. I was no longer sitting in my apartment. I was standing on the bridge of an alien starship, looking out through a massive viewport at the rings of Saturn. The ship around me was impossibly vast, with corridors that seemed to stretch for miles and technology that hummed with barely contained energy. But something was wrong. Alarms were blaring, and the crew around me moved with the controlled panic of people facing imminent death. I could feel Keth's emotions as if they were my own. Terror for his crew. Desperation to find a solution. And, underneath it all, a growing hope as he studied the primitive but resourceful planet nearby. Earth. I saw through his eyes as he observed humans going about their daily lives. Watched as he analyzed their technology, their social structures, their problem-solving capabilities. I felt his growing conviction that despite humanity's relative primitiveness, they possessed something his advanced civilization had lost. Creativity. Adaptability. The ability to find solutions that others couldn't see. The memory shifted, and I was standing in the empty apartment next to mine, watching through sophisticated sensors as I lived my mundane life just a few feet away. I felt Keth's scientific fascination with human behavior, but also something else. Loneliness. He had been alone in that empty apartment for weeks, studying a species he could never truly connect with, desperately searching for someone who could help save the people he cared about. When the crystal's influence faded, I found myself back on my couch, tears streaming down my face. The emotions had been so real, so intense. I could still feel echoes of Keth's desperation and hope. You're telling the truth, I whispered. Yes, Keth said simply. I wiped my eyes and looked up at him. This alien being who had traveled impossible distances and was now depending on me, a nobody from Seattle, to help save his crew. Okay, I said. I'll help you. Keth's expression didn't change, but I caught a flicker of relief in those violet eyes. Thank you, Mr. Chen, he said. I will not forget this kindness. Call me David, I said, standing up. If we're going to save your crew, we might as well be on a first-name basis. David, Keth repeated, as if testing the sound. We should prepare to leave immediately. Time is not our ally. I looked around my apartment one more time. In a few hours, I would be boarding a plane to Denver on what everyone thought was a routine business trip. In reality, I would be embarking on the adventure of a lifetime. Possibly the last adventure of my lifetime, if things went badly. But, for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. I had a purpose. Something that mattered. What do I need to pack? I asked. Kat smiled, and the expression looked strange on his alien features. Pack light, he said. Where we are going, human possessions will be of limited utility. As I moved toward my bedroom to throw some clothes into a bag, I couldn't help but grin. My alien neighbor's late-night knock had changed everything. I just hoped I was ready for what came next. The flight to Denver was the longest 3 hours of my life. I sat in my window seat, staring out at the clouds and trying to convince myself that the previous night hadn't been some kind of elaborate hallucination brought on by too much caffeine and stress. But the memory crystal's revelations were still fresh in my mind, along with the strange business card Kath had given me before I left for the airport. It looked like an ordinary piece of plastic, the kind any company might hand out at a trade show. But, when I held it up to the airplane window, holographic text appeared that was invisible under normal lighting. An address in the Denver Industrial District, along with coordinates that meant nothing to me but, apparently meant everything to my alien companion. The businessman sitting next to me kept glancing over, probably wondering why I was staring so intently at what appeared to be a blank piece of plastic. I couldn't exactly explain that I was looking at alien technology that would guide me to a secret facility where I would attempt to fabricate components for a stranded starship. My phone buzzed with a text message as we began our descent into Denver International Airport. Unknown number, but I recognized the formal tone immediately. Transportation awaits in short-term parking, Level 3, Space 247. Vehicle identification, blue sedan with license plate ZXR 9847. Key will be under driver's side floor mat. Proceed directly to coordinates provided. Time remaining, 52 hours, 31 minutes. I deleted the message immediately, my hands shaking slightly. 52 hours. Less than 2.5 days to save 47 lives. No pressure at all. Denver International Airport was its usual chaotic self, with travelers hurrying in every direction and the constant noise of announcements echoing through the terminals. I made my way through baggage claim and out to the parking garage, my single duffel bag feeling heavier with each step. When I reached Level 3, Space 247 was exactly where Keth had said it would be. The blue sedan looked completely ordinary, the kind of rental car you would see in any airport lot. But, when I bent down to retrieve the key from under the floor mat, my fingers brushed against what felt like a small electronic device. I pulled it out and found myself holding what looked like a modified smartphone, similar to the device Kath had shown me the night before. The screen activated the moment I touched it, displaying a map of the Denver area with a pulsing red dot indicating my destination. The route looked straightforward enough, a 40-minute drive into an industrial section of the city I had never heard of. But, as I started the car and pulled out of the parking garage, I began to notice things that didn't quite add up. The sedan's engine was completely silent, more like an electric vehicle than a gasoline-powered one. The dashboard displays were sharper and more responsive than any car technology one had seen before. And, when I accidentally brushed my hand against what looked like a standard radio dial, the entire windshield briefly flickered and displayed what appeared to be a heads-up navigation system. Alien technology disguised as human manufacturing. I was driving what was essentially a spacecraft made to look like a Toyota Camry. The drive through Denver's industrial district was exactly as depressing as I had expected. Endless blocks of warehouses, manufacturing plants, and storage facilities, separated by pothole-riddled streets and surrounded by chain-link fences topped with razor wire. The kind of area where you could make a lot of noise without anyone caring enough to investigate. The coordinates led me to a facility that looked abandoned from the outside. Rust-streaked metal siding, broken windows, and a parking lot full of weeds growing through cracks in the asphalt. A faded sign by the front gate read Meridian Advanced Materials, closed by order of Health Department. I parked the sedan next to what appeared to be the only other vehicle in the lot, a black SUV with tinted windows. As I walked toward the main building, I could hear the low hum of machinery coming from somewhere inside. Whatever this place was, it definitely wasn't abandoned. The front door was locked, but the alien device in my pocket buzzed softly and displayed a new message: service entrance, east side of building. Access code 7749. I found the service entrance exactly where indicated, a steel door marked with warnings about authorized personnel only. The electronic keypad beside it looked standard enough, but when I entered the access code, I heard multiple heavy locks disengaging with a series of mechanical clicks that seemed far too complex for a simple warehouse facility. The door opened to reveal a corridor that definitely hadn't been built by human hands. The walls were covered in what looked like polished metal panels that seemed to generate their own soft illumination. The floor was made of some kind of material that felt solid under my feet but gave slightly with each step, like walking on a surface designed to absorb impact. "Welcome, David Chen," a voice said from speakers hidden somewhere in the ceiling. It was Ket's voice, but with a strange electronic quality that suggested it was being transmitted from a considerable distance. "Please proceed to the fabrication chamber at the end of the corridor." I walked slowly down the hallway, my footsteps echoing despite the sound-dampening properties of the floor material. The whole place felt wrong, like stepping into a movie set that was trying to look futuristic but couldn't quite hide its artificial nature. Every surface was too smooth, too perfect. Nothing showed the normal wear and tear you would expect from a functioning industrial facility. The corridor ended at another steel door, this one marked with symbols that definitely weren't human in origin. They looked almost like mathematical equations, but written in a script that hurt my eyes to look at directly. The door slid open as I approached, revealing what could only be described as a mad scientist's laboratory. The fabrication chamber was enormous, easily the size of a football field, with a ceiling that disappeared into shadow high above. The walls were lined with machinery that looked like a cross between 3D printers and particle accelerators, all connected by thick cables that pulsed with energy I could actually see flowing through them. In the center of the room stood a workstation that was clearly designed for human use, with familiar keyboards and monitors alongside alien control surfaces that shifted and changed as I watched. But it was the figure standing beside the workstation that made my blood turn to ice. It definitely wasn't Keth. This alien was taller and more angular, with skin that seemed to shift between different shades of gray like oil on water. Where Keth's eyes were violet and somehow warm despite their alienness, this being's eyes were jet black and reminded me of a shark's gaze. Cold, predatory, calculating. "Mr. Chen," the creature said, its voice carrying the same precise pronunciation as Keth's but with an undertone that made my skin crawl. "I am Commander Vex of the Hegemony Reclamation Force. I have been waiting for you." "Where's Keth?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Your Federation friend is indisposed," Vex replied with what might have been amusement. "Do not be concerned for his welfare. He remains functional and will be returned unharmed once you have completed the task for which you were recruited." The alien device in my pocket began buzzing frantically, and I pulled it out to see urgent text scrolling across its surface. "Danger. Hostile contact. Extraction protocols activated. Maintain compliance until rescue arrives." Vex noticed my attention to the device and made a dismissive gesture. "Yes, your Federation escort is attempting to coordinate a rescue operation. Unfortunately for him, my forces have been monitoring his communications since his vessel first entered this system. No assistance will be forthcoming." I backed away from the alien, my mind racing. This was clearly the complication Keth had mentioned but hadn't fully explained. The hostile aliens he had been worried about weren't just a possibility anymore. They were standing right in front of me. "What do you want?" I asked. "The same thing your friend wants," Vex said, moving closer with a fluid grace that was somehow more unsettling than if he had walked normally. "The fabrication of a critical component. However, our purposes differ significantly." "What does that mean?" "It means that the component you will create will not be used to repair a damaged Federation vessel," Vex explained. "Instead, it will be installed in one of our ships to complete a weapon system capable of sterilizing your entire planet." The words hit me like a physical blow. Sterilize the planet. Every man, woman, and child on Earth dead. Because I had agreed to help build something I didn't understand. "I won't do it," I said. "Oh, but you will," Vex replied calmly. "Because if you refuse, I will simply torture your Federation friend until you comply. And, after that, I will begin systematically destroying every human settlement on this continent until you change your mind." You have perhaps seen images of what we call orbital bombardment in your entertainment media. The reality is far more unpleasant. I stared at the alien, trying to process what he was telling me. Keth was captured and, probably being tortured. The entire human race was under threat. And, I was the key to either salvation or annihilation, depending on what choice I made in the next few minutes. Why me? I asked desperately. Why not just force Keth to build whatever you need? Because the component requires intimate knowledge of human manufacturing techniques, Vex explained. Your friend possesses theoretical understanding, but lacks the practical experience necessary for successful fabrication. You, however, have spent years working with the primitive but effective technologies your species has developed. And, if I build this thing for you? Then, your planet dies quickly and painlessly instead of slowly and painfully, Vex said. I am not entirely without mercy. I looked around the fabrication chamber, trying to spot anything that might help me. The machinery looked incredibly complex, but it was designed to be operated by a human. Which meant there had to be safety protocols, emergency shutdowns, something I could use to sabotage the process. How do I know you're telling the truth about Keth? I asked, stalling for time. Vex made another gesture, and one of the wall screens activated to show a holding cell that was clearly somewhere else in the facility. Keth was there, secured to what looked like a medical examination table with restraints that glowed with the same energy I had seen in the cables. He appeared to be conscious but weak, his violet eyes dulled with what might have been pain or exhaustion. As you can see, he remains functional, Vex said. For now. But my patience is not unlimited. You will begin fabrication immediately. I walked slowly toward the workstation, my mind desperately trying to think of some way out of this situation. The alien device in my pocket was still buzzing, and I managed to glance at its screen without being obvious about it. The text had changed, component specifications uploaded. Fabrication process modified. Trust the plan. Modified? What did that mean? The specifications for the required component have been uploaded to your workstation, Vex said, apparently unaware of the messages I was receiving. The fabrication process should take approximately 8 hours to complete. You will not be permitted food or rest during this time. I sat down at the workstation and began examining the control interfaces. The human components were familiar enough: standard keyboards, touchscreen displays, engineering software that looked like advanced versions of programs I had used in college. But, integrated throughout were alien elements that provided capabilities no human technology could match. The component specifications appeared on the main screen, and my heart sank as I realized what I was looking at. It was some kind of focusing array, clearly designed to direct and amplify energy on a massive scale. The kind of thing that could turn a starship's propulsion system into a planet-killing weapon. But, as I studied the plans more carefully, I began to notice subtle inconsistencies. Tolerances that seemed unnecessarily tight in some areas and surprisingly loose in others. Material specifications that included elements that would actually weaken the final product rather than strengthen it. It was as if someone had taken the original plans and carefully introduced flaws that would cause the device to fail catastrophically under stress. The modified specifications Keth had somehow uploaded to my alien device. He had sabotaged the plans. I glanced over at Vex, who was standing near one of the walls examining what looked like a tactical display of the solar system. He seemed confident that I would simply follow orders and build him his planet killer. He had no reason to suspect that the Federation had anticipated this possibility and prepared accordingly. I need to understand the fabrication process before I begin, I said loudly enough for Vex to hear. If I make a mistake, it could damage the machinery. Proceed with caution, Vex replied without looking away from his display. But, do not delay unnecessarily. I began initializing the fabrication systems, following the modified specifications exactly. The machinery around the chamber hummed to life, and I felt a thrill of fear and excitement as I realized I was operating technology that was probably centuries ahead of anything humans had ever imagined. The process was surprisingly intuitive once I got the hang of it. The alien interfaces translated complex engineering concepts into visual representations that made sense to a human mind. I could see exactly how each component would fit together, how stress would distribute through the structure, how energy would flow through the completed device. And I could see exactly where it would fail. The modifications Keth had introduced were brilliant in their subtlety. To a casual observer, the component would appear to be built exactly to specification. It would even pass most testing protocols. But, under the extreme stresses of actual operation, microscopic flaws in the crystal matrix would propagate and cause the entire array to shatter. 3 hours into the fabrication process, Vex began showing signs of impatience. He moved away from his tactical display and began pacing around the chamber, occasionally stopping to examine my work more closely. "Your progress appears satisfactory," he said during one of these inspections. "But I am curious about your emotional state. Most humans would be significantly more distressed by the prospect of causing their species extinction." "I'm pretty distressed," I replied, not looking up from the control interface. "I'm just trying to focus on the technical aspects so I don't make any mistakes." "Admirable pragmatism," Vex said. "Your species may be primitive, but you demonstrate useful adaptability." If only he knew how adaptable we really were. The fabrication process required constant attention as the machinery built the component layer by layer at the atomic level. I had to monitor dozens of different parameters simultaneously, making minute adjustments to ensure the final product would meet specifications. The modified specifications, that is. By the 6th hour, I was beginning to feel the strain. My eyes burned from staring at screens, my back ached from sitting in the same position, and my hands were starting to shake from caffeine withdrawal. But I couldn't show any weakness. Vex was watching me increasingly closely, and I couldn't afford to give him any reason to examine my work more carefully. "The crystalline matrix is approaching completion," I announced as the fabrication entered its final phase. "Another 90 minutes should be sufficient." "Excellent," Vex said. "And what of the power coupling interface?" I checked the specifications, both the original and modified versions. "Assembly will be automatic once the crystal growth is complete. The entire component should be ready for installation within 2 hours. Then, contact my ship and inform them that we will be ready to depart this system ahead of schedule," Vex said to someone I couldn't see. Apparently there were other aliens in the facility, monitoring our progress from elsewhere. As the fabrication process entered its final stages, the machinery around the chamber began operating at higher power levels. The humming sound increased to something more like a roar, and I could feel vibrations through the floor that suggested enormous amounts of energy were being channeled through the systems. That's when I noticed something that made my blood freeze in my veins. The tactical display Vex had been monitoring showed a representation of the inner solar system, with various ships marked in different colors. Blue markers apparently represented Federation vessels, while red ones indicated hegemony forces. And there were a lot more red markers than blue ones. Worse, one of the red markers was moving steadily toward Earth. I tried to estimate the scale of the display and felt my heart sink. If I was reading it correctly, the approaching ship was massive. Easily the size of a city, probably larger. And it was already inside the orbit of Mars, moving toward Earth at a significant fraction of the speed of light. Even if my sabotage worked perfectly and the weapon component failed, the hegemony had enough firepower positioned around the solar system to destroy human civilization several times over. Keth's rescue mission wasn't just about saving his crew anymore. It was about saving my entire species. "Component fabrication complete," the system announced in a synthesized voice that somehow managed to sound both human and utterly alien. "Quality assurance protocols initiating." I watched the screens nervously as automated systems examined every aspect of the finished component. If the sabotage was too obvious, if I had made the flaws too detectable, everything would be over. Vex would realize what had happened and probably decide to just bombard Earth immediately rather than risk further Federation interference. "All specifications met," the system announced after what felt like an eternity. "Component ready for extraction." Vex moved to the fabrication chamber's central pedestal, where the completed component now rested in a containment field that made it appear to float in midair. It was actually quite beautiful, looking more like an elaborate piece of jewelry than a weapon component. Crystalline structures that caught and reflected light in impossible ways, connected by what appeared to be threads of pure energy. Magnificent, Vex said with obvious satisfaction. Your species may lack sophistication, but you possess a certain crude effectiveness that has its uses. He reached into the containment field and carefully lifted out the component, examining it from multiple angles. I held my breath, waiting for him to notice something wrong, but apparently the sabotage was too subtle for even his enhanced senses to detect. Excellent work, Mr. Chen, Vex said finally. You have saved your planet an additional few hours of existence. What about Keth? I asked. You said you would release him. I said he would be returned unharmed, Vex corrected. I did not specify when. He will be released when we have departed this system and confirmed that the weapon is functioning correctly. Of course. Why had I expected an alien conqueror to keep his word? Vex placed the component in what looked like a specially designed carrying case and activated some kind of communication device. Transport shuttle, prepare for immediate departure. The package is ready for delivery. That's when everything went wrong. The lights in the fabrication chamber suddenly cut out, plunging us into complete darkness. Emergency lighting flickered on a moment later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow that made Vex's shifting gray skin look even more unsettling. What is happening? Vex demanded, speaking into his communication device. Report. The response came through speakers placed around the chamber, but it was filled with static and what sounded like weapons fire in the background. Under attack. Federation forces, multiple breaches, require immediate. Static, evacuation protocols. Vex's black eyes narrowed as he processed this information. The rescue operation your friend mentioned, he said to me. It appears his communications were not as compromised as we believed. The alien device in my pocket was buzzing frantically again, and I managed to check its screen while Vex was distracted by the tactical situation. New text was appearing faster than I could read it. Federation assault team en route to your location. Maintain distance from hostile. Component sabotage confirmed successful. Prepare for extraction. A rescue team was coming for me. All I had to do was survive the next few minutes. You will accompany me, Vex said, grabbing my arm with a grip that felt like being caught in a mechanical vice. If Federation forces attempt to interfere with our departure, you will serve as an effective deterrent. He began dragging me toward a section of the chamber I hadn't noticed before, where what appeared to be a previously hidden doorway was sliding open to reveal another corridor. This one looked more like a spacecraft interior than a building, with curved walls and surfaces that definitely hadn't been manufactured on Earth. Where are you taking me? I asked, trying to resist his grip without success. To my ship, Vex replied. Where you will have the privilege of witnessing the first test of the weapon you helped create. We moved through the alien corridor at a pace that was almost too fast for me to keep up with. Vex seemed capable of moving much more quickly than his normal walking speed suggested, and I found myself being half-dragged along behind him as he headed toward what I assumed was some kind of transport. The corridor ended at what was unmistakably an airlock, complete with warning lights and atmospheric pressure indicators that somehow displayed information in both alien symbols and English text. Beyond the airlock's transparent aluminum window, I could see what looked like a small spacecraft attached to the facility via some kind of docking tube. As Vex began the airlock cycling process, explosions echoed through the facility behind us. Whatever the Federation rescue team was doing, they weren't being subtle about it. Your friends are too late, Vex said as atmospheric pressure equalized and the inner airlock door sealed behind us. In 30 minutes, this component will be installed in our primary weapon array. In 60 minutes, your planet's surface will be a molten wasteland. The outer airlock door opened, and Vex pulled me into his ship. If I had thought the fabrication facility was impressive, the hegemony vessel was absolutely stunning. Every surface seemed to be made of the same shifting, color-changing material as Vex's skin, and the technology was so advanced it looked more like art than machinery. There were no visible control panels or displays, just flowing surfaces that responded to touch and seemed to anticipate the operator's intentions. Pilot, immediate departure, Vex commanded as we entered what was obviously the bridge. Set course for the primary vessel. Yes, Commander, came a reply from someone I couldn't see. The ship began to move with no sensation of acceleration, but, through the main viewer I could see the industrial facility falling away below us as we climbed toward space. That's when I saw the battle. Even in the darkness of space, the combat was clearly visible. Streams of energy weapons fire crossed between dozens of ships, creating a light show that was both beautiful and terrifying. The Federation vessels were smaller and more maneuverable, but they were heavily outnumbered by the angular, predatory-looking hegemony ships. And, in the center of it all was the massive vessel I had seen on the tactical display. It was even larger than I had imagined, easily 10 miles long and bristling with weapon emplacements that could probably crack a moon. The kind of ship that didn't need to worry about subtlety or finesse. It could just point at a planet and delete it from existence. Magnificent, is it not? Vex said, noticing my expression. The Devastator represents the culmination of hegemony military engineering. With the component you fabricated, its primary weapon will be capable of igniting a planet's atmosphere or boiling away its oceans. I watched in horrified fascination as we approached the enormous ship. Docking bays that could have housed entire city blocks opened to receive us, and I realized that this was probably the most advanced piece of technology in the galaxy. And I had just helped make it even more deadly. But I had also helped ensure it would destroy itself when they tried to use it. The sabotaged component was a time bomb waiting to go off. All I had to do was survive long enough to see it happen. As our small ship settled into its docking bay, I caught sight of another vessel being brought aboard. This one was clearly Federation in origin, sleek and organic-looking compared to the brutal functionality of hegemony design. And, through its transparent sections, I could see a familiar figure secured inside. Keth. They were bringing him aboard as well. Which meant we were both about to witness either the salvation or destruction of Earth, depending on whether my sabotage would work when the moment of truth arrived. The next few hours would determine the fate of 7 billion people. No pressure at all. The detention cell aboard the hegemony dreadnought was exactly what I had expected from a species that viewed other civilizations as obstacles to be eliminated. Bare metal walls, a simple bench that was somehow both too hard and too narrow to be comfortable, and a force field barrier that hummed with lethal energy. No windows, no entertainment, nothing to distract from the knowledge that I was trapped aboard a ship designed to commit genocide. Keth was in the cell across from mine, and seeing him up close made it clear that his captors hadn't been gentle. His silver hair was matted with what might have been blood, and one of his arms hung at an unnatural angle. But his violet eyes were still alert and aware, studying our surroundings with the analytical gaze of someone looking for opportunities. "David," he said when he saw me looking at him. "I apologize for the deception regarding the complexity of our situation." "Yeah, well, next time maybe lead with, 'By the way, there are hostile aliens who want to destroy your planet,'" I replied. "Just a thought." Despite everything, Keth actually smiled at that. "Your species' capacity for humor in desperate circumstances is remarkable. It is one of the reasons I believed you would be suited for this task." "Speaking of the task," I said, lowering my voice in case our captors were monitoring our conversation, "I followed the modified specifications exactly." "Will it work?" "If you fabricated the component according to the parameters I uploaded to your device, then, yes," Keth replied. "The sabotage is embedded at the quantum level. When the weapon array reaches full power, the crystalline matrix will experience cascade failure." "And what does cascade failure mean, exactly?" "It means the weapon will destroy itself and likely cause significant damage to the ship attempting to use it," Keth explained. "However, the effect will not be immediately apparent. The component will function normally during testing phases and low-power operations. Only when they attempt to actually target your planet will the sabotage activate." That was something, at least. But it also meant we were going to have to sit here helplessly while the hegemony prepared to commit genocide, knowing that our only hope was a piece of sabotage so subtle that even we couldn't be completely sure it would work. "What about your crew?" I asked. "The ones on the ship near Saturn?" Keth's expression darkened. "The life support failure was real, but not accidental. The hegemony intercepted our vessel and disabled it as part of their plan to force Federation involvement in this situation. My crew is being held aboard another hegemony ship, and their fate depends on the success or failure of this operation." So the stakes were even higher than I had realized. It wasn't just Earth at risk, but Keth's entire crew as well. 47 Federation citizens who would die if my sabotage didn't work or if the hegemony decided to cut their losses and retreat. How long do we have? I asked. Based on the tactical displays I observed during our transport, Keth said, I estimate the weapon installation will be complete within 6 hours. Testing protocols will require another 2 hours. If the hegemony follows standard procedures, they will attempt to target your planet approximately 8 hours from now. 8 hours. Less than a full day to either save or lose everything. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the massive ship around us. Even through the thick walls of our detention cells, I could hear the hum of enormous machinery, the vibrations of weapons being charged and tested, the distant voices of crew members preparing for battle. This ship was a floating city dedicated entirely to destruction, and we were trapped in its belly like modern-day Jonahs. About 2 hours into our imprisonment, the ship's intercom system activated with a sound like wind chimes made of metal. All personnel, prepare for weapon system integration, a voice announced in the same precise, emotionless tone that seemed standard among hegemony forces. Final testing will commence in 4 hours. Planetary bombardment will begin at 0800 ship time. I felt my stomach clench with fear. 0800 ship time. I had no idea what time zone we were operating on, but it didn't matter. In less than 6 hours, the hegemony would try to use my sabotaged component to murder every human being on Earth. David, Keth said quietly, drawing my attention back to our immediate situation. There is something you should know about the component you fabricated. More complications? I asked. Not complications, precisely, Keth replied. But, the sabotage I programmed into the specifications was not designed merely to disable the weapon. When the cascade failure occurs, the quantum resonance effects will propagate through every system connected to the primary power grid. I stared at him. Are you saying the entire ship will be destroyed? I am saying that this vessel will experience what your military might term catastrophic explosive decompression, Keth explained. The Devastator will not survive the weapon test. On one hand, that was good news. The hegemony's most powerful ship would be eliminated, significantly reducing their ability to threaten Earth. On the other hand, we were currently aboard that ship, which meant we would be eliminated along with it. So we need to find a way off this ship before the weapon test, I said. Indeed, Keth agreed. Though our options are somewhat limited given our current circumstances. Our current circumstances being that we were locked in energy cages aboard an alien warship filled with beings who viewed us as useful tools at best and annoying obstacles at worst. Tell me about hegemony technology, I said. These force field barriers, the detention systems, anything that might help us get out of here. Keth examined the glowing energy field that separated him from the corridor outside his cell. Hegemony containment systems are efficient but not sophisticated. They rely on brute force rather than elegant engineering. The barriers are designed to prevent escape through overwhelming power rather than through intelligent design. Which means they have weaknesses that a more subtle approach might exploit, Keth explained. However, such exploitation would require tools and knowledge we do not currently possess. I looked around my cell more carefully, searching for anything that might be useful. The walls were featureless metal plates, apparently welded or fused together with no visible seams. The bench was built into the wall and couldn't be moved. The force field generator was somewhere outside the cell, beyond our reach. But then, I remembered the alien device in my pocket. Somehow, our captors had missed it when they threw us in here. It was still there, a small piece of Federation technology that might be capable of interfacing with hegemony systems in ways they hadn't anticipated. I pulled out the device and activated its screen, keeping it low and angled away from any potential surveillance cameras. The display showed the same star map I had seen before, but with new information overlaid on top. Ship schematics, power distribution networks, and what looked like security protocols. Keth, I whispered, showing him the device. Can this thing help us? His eyes widened when he saw what was displayed on the screen. That device contains a complete intelligence package for this class of vessel. Structural weak points, system vulnerabilities, emergency protocols. Where did you obtain such detailed information? From your ship's computers, I replied. It was uploaded when you gave me the sabotage specifications. Then, my crew is alive and still attempting to assist our mission, Keth said with obvious relief. This data could only have been compiled by someone with access to Federation intelligence databases. I studied the ship schematics more carefully, trying to understand what I was looking at. The Devastator was indeed massive, with thousands of decks and compartments spread across its 10-mile length. But, like all ships, it had critical systems that everything else depended on. Life support, power distribution, navigation, communications. Here, I said, pointing to a section of the schematic that pulsed with red warning indicators. What's this area? Keth leaned forward to examine the display. Primary power regulation facility. All energy distribution for the ship is controlled from there, including the containment systems for these detention cells. Can we get there from here? Not directly, Keth replied. But, there are maintenance conduits and service passages that connect to that section. If we could find a way out of these cells, it might be possible to reach the power regulation facility without being detected. And, once we're there, we could disable the containment systems throughout the detention block, potentially freeing any other prisoners being held aboard this vessel, Keth explained. We could also access the ship's communication systems to contact Federation forces. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was better than sitting here waiting to be vaporized when my sabotage took effect. I studied the device's interface more carefully, looking for anything that might help us escape our immediate predicament. The Federation intelligence package included detailed information about hegemony containment technology, including the specific frequency modulations used to generate the force field barriers. What if we could disrupt the power frequency for just a few seconds? I asked. Would that be enough to shut down the barriers? Theoretically, yes, Keth said. But such disruption would require direct access to the power coupling system, which is located outside our cells. Not necessarily, I replied, remembering something from my years working with electronic systems. Every power grid has harmonic resonance frequencies. If we could generate the right interference pattern, we might be able to create a feedback loop that would overload the local power couplers. I began working with the device's interface, trying to access its communication subsystems. If I could generate a signal at exactly the right frequency and broadcast it at sufficient power, it might be possible to interfere with the containment system's operation. The work was complicated by the fact that I was essentially trying to hack alien technology using other alien technology, neither of which came with instruction manuals. But, the basic principles of electronics and power distribution were universal, regardless of which species had developed them. After 20 minutes of trial and error, I managed to access what appeared to be the device's emergency beacon system. It was designed to broadcast distress signals across multiple frequencies simultaneously, but I thought I could modify it to generate a more focused interference pattern. I think I've got something, I told Keth. But I'll need to know the exact power frequency of these barriers. Keth closed his eyes and pressed his hand against the force field barrier of his cell. For a moment, I thought he was about to electrocute himself. But then, I realized he was using some kind of enhanced sensory ability to analyze the energy pattern. 47.3 terahertz, he said after a few seconds. With harmonic resonance spikes at 23.65 and 94.6 terahertz. I input those frequencies into the device's signal generator, then began calculating the interference pattern that would create maximum disruption. It was like trying to solve a complex equation in my head while under extreme stress, but gradually the numbers began to make sense. Ready, I said finally. But I need to warn you, this is going to be loud and probably painful. The interference pattern will affect your nervous system as well as the containment barriers. Do it, Keth replied without hesitation. I activated the modified beacon. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The device in my hand began emitting a sound like 1,000 fingernails on a chalkboard mixed with the screaming of jet engines. The force field barriers around our cells flickered and sparked, their normal steady glow becoming an erratic strobe that made my eyes water. But, more importantly, the barriers began to weaken. I could see gaps appearing in the energy fields, places where the interference pattern had disrupted the power flow enough to create openings. They weren't large, and they weren't stable, but they might be enough. Now! I shouted over the noise. Keth threw himself against his flickering barrier just as one of the gaps appeared. The energy field flared and sparked around him, but he managed to squeeze through before it could stabilize. I followed his example, diving through a gap in my own barrier just as the device's power supply began to fail. The interference stopped, and the corridors around the detention block plunged into emergency lighting as the power grid attempted to restore normal operation. We had maybe 30 seconds before full power was restored and security systems came online. "This way," Keth said, pulling me toward what looked like a maintenance hatch set into one of the corridor walls. The alien intelligence package on my device was displaying a route to the power regulation facility, and Keth seemed to be following it perfectly despite his injuries. The maintenance conduit was barely large enough for a human to crawl through, and it was definitely not designed with comfort in mind. The walls were lined with power cables and data conduits that hummed with energy, and the air was filled with the ozone smell of high-voltage electricity. But it was also hidden from the ship's main surveillance systems, and, according to the intelligence package, it connected directly to the power regulation facility we needed to reach. We crawled through the conduit for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, following a route that twisted and turned through the ship's superstructure like a three-dimensional maze. Occasionally we could hear the sound of hegemony crew members moving through the corridors below us, and once we had to stop completely when what sounded like a security patrol passed directly beneath our hiding place. Finally, the conduit opened into a larger chamber that was clearly one of the ship's critical engineering spaces. The power regulation facility was exactly what I had expected from a civilization obsessed with brute force solutions. Enormous machinery that looked like it could supply energy to a small city, all connected by cables thick enough to walk through, and control systems that seemed designed more for intimidation than efficiency. "There," Keth said, pointing to a central control console that was surrounded by holographic displays showing power distribution throughout the ship. "If we can access those systems, we can disable containment throughout the detention blocks and establish communication with Federation forces." But, as we moved toward the console, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. We weren't alone in the chamber. 3 hegemony technicians were working at various stations around the power regulation facility, apparently performing routine maintenance tasks. They hadn't noticed us yet, but it was only a matter of time before one of them turned around and saw 2 escaped prisoners standing in the middle of their secure facility. "Options?" I whispered to Keth. "Very limited," he replied quietly. "Hegemony personnel are physically stronger and more durable than either humans or my species. Direct confrontation would not be advisable." "What about a distraction?" "What kind of distraction?" I looked around the chamber, studying the massive machinery and thinking about what I knew of power distribution systems. If this facility controlled energy flow throughout the ship, then it probably had emergency protocols designed to prevent catastrophic overloads. "What happens if we trigger an emergency power shutdown?" I asked. "Life support, artificial gravity, and containment systems would switch to backup power," Keth explained. "However, the shutdown would only last for approximately 10 minutes before main power was restored. 10 minutes might be enough." I began studying the alien device's interface again, looking for anything that could help us trigger an emergency shutdown. The Federation intelligence package included detailed schematics of hegemony power systems, and I was beginning to see patterns in their design philosophy. Like everything else about their civilization, their power grids were built for maximum output with minimal sophistication. Which meant they were vulnerable to exactly the kind of creative problem-solving that humans excelled at. "Here," I said, showing Keth a section of the power grid schematic. "This coupling junction connects main power to the backup systems. If we could cause a feedback loop at exactly the right moment, it would trigger the emergency shutdown protocols without causing permanent damage. How do we access that coupling junction?" I pointed to a maintenance panel located directly behind where one of the hegemony technicians was working. "We need to get to that control interface without being seen." Keth studied the situation for a moment, then nodded toward another section of the chamber. "I can create a distraction that will draw their attention away from that area. But you will need to work quickly." "What kind of distraction?" The kind that involves deliberately triggering a minor power surge in the auxiliary systems, Keth replied. It will cause alarms but no actual damage. However, it will also reveal our presence aboard this ship. Do it, I said. We're running out of time anyway. Keth moved carefully toward one of the auxiliary control stations while I positioned myself near the maintenance panel we needed to access. When he was in position, he gave me a subtle hand signal and, then, began manipulating the alien controls with surprising expertise. The effect was immediate. Alarms began blaring throughout the chamber, and warning lights bathed everything in a pulsing red glow. The three hegemony technicians immediately moved toward the source of the disruption, giving me a clear path to the maintenance panel. I accessed the alien device's interface and began uploading the feedback loop program I had designed. The process seemed to take forever, but, according to the device's display, it was actually only 30 seconds. Long enough for the hegemony technicians to discover Keth's location and begin moving toward him with obvious hostile intent. David, now would be an excellent time. Keth called out as the first technician reached for what looked like some kind of weapon. I activated the feedback loop program. The effect was far more dramatic than I had expected. Every light in the chamber went out simultaneously, plunging us into complete darkness. The humming of machinery fell silent. Even the gravity seemed to fluctuate for a moment before backup systems kicked in. Emergency power protocols activated, a synthesized voice announced throughout the ship. Main power offline. Estimated restoration time, 9 minutes, 47 seconds. In the darkness, I could hear the sounds of confusion and panic from the hegemony technicians. They were apparently as dependent on their technology as any other species, and, being suddenly deprived of it left them disoriented. Keth, where are you? I called out. Here, his voice came from somewhere near the central control console. The power shutdown has given us access to the ship's communication systems. I am attempting to contact Federation forces. I felt my way through the darkened chamber toward the sound of his voice, using the alien device's dim screen glow as a navigation aid. When I reached the central console, I could see Keth working with control interfaces that were apparently designed to function even during power outages. Any luck? I asked. I have established a communication link with the Federation fleet, Keth replied. But, the situation is more complex than we anticipated. The hegemony has positioned vessels throughout this system, and my rescue mission has escalated into a full military engagement. What does that mean for us? It means that even if we escape this ship, there is no guarantee of safety, Keth explained. The battle for control of this system will determine the fate of both your planet and my crew. As if to emphasize his point, the ship around us suddenly shuddered with the impact of weapon fire. We were under attack, probably by the same Federation forces that were supposed to rescue us. How long until they test the weapon? I asked. Keth checked a chronometer on his wrist. Approximately 4 hours, assuming the main power restoration proceeds on schedule. And, how long until this feedback loop burns itself out? Based on the power coupling specifications in the intelligence package, I estimate we have another 7 minutes before main power is restored. 7 minutes to figure out our next move. 7 minutes to find a way off this ship before my sabotage turned it into the largest firework display in human history. Can you access the ship's transportation systems from here? I asked. Shuttle bay controls are routed through this facility, Keth replied, his hands moving rapidly across the alien control interfaces. But, launching a shuttle during a space battle would be extremely dangerous. More dangerous than staying aboard a ship that's about to explode? An excellent point, Keth admitted. I am accessing Shuttle Bay 7, which appears to have the least security presence at the moment. The central control console lit up with tactical displays showing the battle raging around us. Federation ships darted between the larger hegemony vessels like mosquitoes attacking elephants, using speed and maneuverability to compensate for their smaller size and lighter armament. But, there were simply too many enemy ships, and it was clear that the Federation forces were being overwhelmed. There, Keth said, pointing to a section of the display that showed a small craft moving away from one of the hegemony ships. That vessel appears to be carrying additional prisoners. If we can intercept it before it reaches its destination, we may be able to rescue my crew. First things first, I replied. Let's worry about getting off this ship before we start planning rescue missions. Shuttle Bay 7 is now accessible, Keth announced. Security locks have been disengaged, and launch authorization has been pre-programmed. But we need to reach the bay before main power is restored. How far? Approximately 2 kilometers through corridors that are currently filled with confused and angry hegemony crew members. 2 kilometers. In the dark. Through a ship full of hostile aliens who were probably shooting at anything that moved. This day just kept getting better and better. Lead the way, I said. We left the power regulation facility through an emergency access hatch that opened onto one of the ship's main corridors. The backup lighting provided just enough illumination to avoid walking into walls, but created deep shadows everywhere that could hide potential threats. The corridor was chaos. Hegemony crew members were moving in every direction, some carrying equipment, others apparently just trying to figure out what was happening. Most of them seemed too focused on their immediate tasks to pay attention to 2 figures moving quickly through the shadows, but I knew our luck wouldn't hold forever. We had made it about halfway to Shuttle Bay 7 when the lights came back on. Main power restored, the ship's announcement system declared. All personnel returned to assigned stations. Security alert in effect. All non-essential personnel report to designated areas immediately. Suddenly, the corridor was no longer filled with confused crew members. Instead, it